to nobody.
Welcome back to Two Nobodies, everyone. Happy New Year. Glad to be back here in 2023. And part two of our conversation with the GOAT of mechanical engineering from Waterloo, Brian Cates. Brian, you didn't interrupt me this time. Welcome back to Two Nobodies.
I was
yeah,
good.
You're good.
I was like, don't interrupt him. Don't interrupt.
You're a pro now, man.
I wanted to.
Yeah.
I was itching to do it. No. Happy New Year. Happy to be back. I wanted to keep talking. So.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. It was a fun conversation. It was good getting to know you, and there's still so much more to talk about. So I'm glad. I was talking to you offline, and it seems like you kind of like this podcast thing, hey? It was
kind of taking to it.
Yeah. Except you didn't really like your own voice, which is something you just get used to. Honestly, I'm tired of hearing myself.
Yeah, you're not
too.
supposed to tell everyone.
I think it's a normal thing.
No, I'm joking. I'm joking. It's totally a normal thing.
Yeah.
No, I just heard my voice and I go, ugh. But like I said, yeah, that's a normal thing.
Once you get one of these mics kind of help because it makes it sound just a little bit like a little sexier.
Yeah, I gotta get the pro set up like Rupesh here.
Yeah, it'll get better. I really loved our conversation. I mean, we went through a lot of stuff, and maybe we can just remind folks what we talked about. So, I mean, you talked about we talked about just some men's health things, right? Like of the balding that you had gone through, and just like
well, I think we were sort of catching up. So, I felt like we sort of went all over the place a bit. We talked about balding.
Mm-hmm.
Then what was that sort of led into?
Talk about your thyroid issue and your thyroid cancer that you went through, and what life was like without a thyroid and quality of life there, and then transitioned into just where we had left off of, which was like you and I, which was coming out of high school, going through university, and then going through that engineering program, and how hard you worked, and we kind of just left it there, which was like, okay.
Right.
You're done with the engineering program, and then you traveled a bit. You talked a little bit about that, and then we're like, all right, we got to save this for part two. So what happens after you finish engineering at Waterloo?
I think that's actually the most interesting part of what my story was, and like what might be interesting to hear about for other people. Is just because, and I think I wanted to go back to when I heard part one of what we talked about. I feel like the thing about engineer, or something that I actually found interesting, like hearing the way even you ask the question or the way people think about some of these things. It's just there's this idea of success, right? And I think that's been sort of like the center question that I've been trying to answer, and one of the reasons why I went on this crazy sort of detour and in this direction that people wouldn't have expected from maybe where I was going before. And so I think like the question of success, why do we think that success, if you start going down an academic direction, it seems like success becomes like the same as, sorry, what am I trying to say here? Success becomes that traditional sort of thing. So it's like you're a doctor, a lawyer,
something about some sort of title at the end,
some kind of title, and I think I sort of rebel against that kind of stuff. I think I don't know when that rebellion really in me really started, but I think there's like a certain part of me was capable, I guess you could say, capable of becoming any one of some of these titles. Sure, yeah. I think I was capable of becoming a doctor if I really sort of pushed myself. I was, because I was good at science and math. That would have been possible. I actually did try, and I can talk about that a bit later as part of the story. But it's becoming these things. Like I could have become a doctor if I really tried, and if I went through all the time. I could have, become an accountant if I really wanted to go that route. I could have become, maybe not a lawyer. I don't know if I'm lawyer material. Probably not. Certain personality things stop you from doing certain careers. So anything where I had to be really loud and like a salesman. Actually, I could have been a good technical salesperson.
What is?
I almost
What does
got
that mean?
like selling devices, like actually biomedical devices.
Okay.
I almost ended up as a biomedical device salesperson. And that's like a lot of those jobs that start off, you go into a certain field. Like I actually ended up going into biomedical engineering after, but certain fields like that, you think it's going to be very technical, but then in the end a lot of these companies need sales people.
Okay.
So that's where you end up going. And actually, I think I sort of learned about myself that I am very suited to a technical sales job. I'm not necessarily, and I never thought of myself as a salesman, but as I got older, I sort of realized, actually, like knowing a lot about things helps you become a good salesperson. But that's sort of besides the point here. But I think, all those roles, if I had become one of those things, if I had become a salesperson in the end, people still would have gone, oh, wow, he's successful. Right. Or something like that. And it's interesting to me that because I started to go down this sort of like trades route, and I don't necessarily call myself a tradesperson now. It is somewhat. It's probably the most accurate definition.
Because what would be the trade, I guess?
If I were to put it tight, the trade would be welding now. Okay. And maybe, motorcycle mechanic. Okay. I'm not really an automotive mechanic, but those, again, I've become a jack of all trades. I've become a lot of different things. And that's part of what I'm talking about too, is that success is sort of defined so still so traditionally, I find. I don't know what your take on that is.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that I think the expectation when you start to go into those last years of high school and entering university is that the goal is to get some sort of title, whatever that it might be, and some sort of definitive path, right? Like I think you're always working towards sort of one path. There's no thought of like, oh, I could eventually do something else, or it's like success is defined about this long career in one area. And I think more and more we're seeing that we're not all built to do just one thing, right? Like and I think success is more seen now as far as how you went through that journey, right? And the resilience you may have shown along the way and all those sort of things. And I think that that's starting to emerge a little bit more. But I would agree. I think that the time that when you and I were going through university, and perhaps maybe, I don't know if that's the students still feel that kind of pressure, but it's like, okay, what's that path going to be? It's got to be as clear as possible. And you want to have maybe some sort of good compensation or some sort of title. And I think that narrow view still exists, but I do feel like there's an emerging definition of success that is starting to unravel. So sorry, but
I agree with that too. I think I'm happy to see where things are going. That I think we did grow up still in a time when it was still quite traditional. I think it is changing. I think the ability for people to do different types of jobs now, even on their own, like the ability to be an entrepreneur on your own has just gone through the roof. Like there's so many job titles that didn't exist before, and that people can totally do on their own without going to interviews, without trying to prove themselves to anyone, really. They can just start and do something that they feel passionate about and just go for it, and can be quite successful.
Do you think that's kind of like a bit of a generational thing? Like, I would imagine that with our parents and obviously their parents, like it was still about security, right? Like it was still about making sure that you had a secure job that you could provide for your family, that things were kind of stable, and hopefully then the next generation, which would be us, that we could then launch off of that and be a little bit more innovative and riskier or whatever, and then our kids, hopefully can build off of that. You think it's maybe a little bit of that?
I feel like it keeps going in that direction. It might come back too eventually, where it gets more traditional and more traditional. But no, I think that's definitely what it was. I think our parents were even. I mean, it makes sense when you look back. Like when I think of my grandparents. So my grandparents came to Canada when they were pretty young, and they were immigrants, and they had to. I think my great grandfather had a butcher shop, and then my grandfather worked as a butcher, and then he sort of became his own. He became an entrepreneur in his own way, but it was limited to what he was able to do at that time and what was sort of like he ended up becoming a caterer. So he had restaurants. He actually had a couple of restaurants, and he had a pretty successful catering business. But he was in the food industry, and then so like I actually got along really well with him when I was growing up because he didn't have that academic background, but something about the fact that he was sort of more of an entrepreneur, more of a businessman. I don't know. I guess I didn't realize it until later in life that I have some of the same drive that he had.
That's pretty cool.
And it's sort of like it's sort of interesting to see later. But I think our grandparents' generation, having gone through like the struggle of running a butcher shop, trying to start your own business, that kind of stuff, I think they saw value in, our parents getting traditional, the better degrees. They saw, okay, well, it was hard for me because I didn't have that academic background. We had to work really hard in the food business, which is like a difficult place to be. It's not easy work. It's just long hours, stressful, hard work, right? So I think they saw, at least in my family, but I think this is what happened in general, is like they saw the value of traditional jobs. And then so our parents ended up getting traditional jobs. And then I think from there, it's sort of come back. It's like every generation tries to make sure that their kids don't do the things that they had to do. So my grandfathers, didn't want my parents to struggle. So he tried to push them, like tried to push my mom. I'm thinking of my mom's dad for the most part. He tried to push my mom and my dad, I guess, and was supportive of my dad becoming a doctor. So my dad became a doctor, my mom became a nurse. Traditional fields. They didn't have to struggle that much once they set up their careers. And my dad came from a not that well-off family, so my dad really had to work hard when he was younger, and he wasn't used to having that much money. So by the time he became a doctor, I think it was valuable. He could see that, and it was, for whatever reason, just going through those careers made sense. I don't think he necessarily, I don't think that would have been the career for him had he had the mentality that he could do other things, the freedom that it was okay to do. If he had the freedom that we had, it's funny. Like I think he would have possibly done something else. Interesting. But that's the way it went anyway. So I think for our generation, it was sort of, I remember my parents were pretty open about it. They're sort of like, just, follow your passion, which is, it happened to be that my passion at the time aligned with, like, I loved math. So like that kind of worked with what was supposed to be a traditional field. But, I guess my point is, I definitely think it's a generational thing. And I think we're part of that, where, at least for me, I saw that having the opportunity and feeling like it was okay to be an artist or something else led to a different idea of success.
But did you still feel, it sounds like you still felt some pressure, and maybe it was more internal pressure of like just attaching yourself to that traditional definition of success then?
Yeah, I think it was still ingrained in me. So despite what I'm saying, that we had this freedom, it somehow for me it still ended up, I guess, because I was good at science and math, and I think I felt pressure to succeed for sure, and succeed was still in my mind just as it was defined for them. So I don't know if I'm going in circles here saying, but I think, anyway, so success is still sort of growing up for, I think it was the same for you, right? It was sort of a bit of a traditional
for sure.
idea.
I mean, the main thing I think would be stability and security. I mean, I studied kinesiology, and my dad's like, "What the heck is that thing?" And like people still don't know what kinesiology is, and once he saw there was some sort of connection to health, and I sort of said, "Yes, I will become a good doctor," sort of thing. I mean, he never had that pressure of me being a doctor, but when I told him that sports medicine was something I might want to get into or whatever, he's like, okay, I see that. And then of course, like, he finally gets bought in, and I graduate with a master's in kinesiology, and I'm like, I'm going into government now. And he's like, oh, okay.
Oh, so, that's right. So I guess you've been through your own ups and downs and changes and different things. Anyway, so I think that's sort of an interesting thing about success. But then, so to lead back to what happened after I graduated from Waterloo. So I think because I was doing these co-op jobs, I think I got a taste of what engineering would be like. Yeah. And I didn't like what I saw. And, I've had people tell me after, like at this age, that, oh, you probably would have liked it, or you possibly would have liked it, but you maybe just got the wrong jobs. Like, you ended up in just specifically the wrong places, and they were pretty dry jobs. That's sort of, I mean, it was a combination of, I had trouble getting engineering jobs for the first year that I was there, because some of the kids that I was in the same class, some of them had more experience already. I didn't even understand that at the time, but I come from a family that knew nothing about engineering. I was the only one that was actually pursuing this. But a lot of people in engineering went into engineering because their dad was an engineer, or their mom was an engineer, or they come from that background, or they had even like automotive experience, like in mechanical engineering, a lot of people were interested in it because they loved cars. So, I found I loved cars, but I didn't know a lot about them. I had no introduction to like auto mechanics, working on cars. I was not hands-on at all. And it was mostly because it was a totally foreign world to me. I didn't have family members that were in it. I didn't have people showing me how to work on cars as I was a kid. And it was intimidating to me. Like, even using some of those tools, like I just didn't do it. So I remember being intimidated by that, but I knew that I loved cars and I loved mechanical things, and it just, like, anything that goes fast to me was exciting. And like figuring out the science behind how to make something move without human input, like without actually expending energy yourself, right? That was, I think, what led to me going into mechanical engineering in the first place. But so a lot of the other students would have already, worked with their dad in a shop, or, whatever it was. So I found those guys were getting jobs a lot easier.
Was it also maybe the connections too? Do you know if that had anything to play with it?
Yeah, it's all those things. It's just like, certain whatever it is, there's tons of reasons why, right? But I didn't even fully understand it. I was so naive. Like, and my parents, I think, were naive about it too. So, trying to talk about why I was struggling to find jobs, I don't think my parents had the right answers either. But it was clearly, like, I remember Toyota, I remember like Ford. I actually remember one of my applications to work for Ford. Right. And I think in the application I wrote like, I'd be so humbled to work for you guys. It was
Right.
it was like the worst.
Yeah.
It was so naive. It was just like an innocent kid asking for, please like, give me a job here. And they would have looked at it and got like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Can I swear on this podcast?
Of course.
By the way?
Absolutely.
The fuck is this? Throw it away. So yeah, like I remember I wanted to work for Toyota. I wanted to try to work for Ford. I wanted to, anything else. There were like automation companies. They were doing like, I remember I was interested in mechatronics at the time. And there were companies that were doing, you know, like automation related devices for cars, or, you know, even other vehicle related things. But I think vehicles were always on my mind, and I could never get those jobs because it's just like for those reasons. And then so what happened is I ended up getting pigeonholed, kind of like from the start, and that's just because my grades were good. That's what I had to rely on. My grades were good. The first job I got, I didn't even have to interview.
Okay.
So what happened is Atomic Energy Canada, which is the company that designs nuclear reactors for Canada, and other parts of the world too, actually. They have some of the smartest people working there, obviously. They basically just picked my resume out of or they came directly to Waterloo and said, "Who's your top guy? Like, give me him." And that was basically it. I didn't have to interview. They just said, "Okay, we're taking him because he's the top guy." And I didn't have any other offers. I think I maybe had one other interview. I don't even remember. And it would have been, I think at one point I got an interview with Nanticoke, which was like a coal power.
Oh, okay.
Remember there was still coal power back in
there's still
when we were growing up?
Coal power here in Alberta, so.
Is there? Yeah. I haven't been keeping up on that. But Nanticoke's shut down as far as I know. There's no more coal in Ontario.
Yeah, no, there isn't.
But anyway, so that one, it's either I worked in coal or nuclear power. And actually, you know, even at the time I was concerned about climate change, and I didn't want to work for a coal plant, that's for sure. So anyway, nuclear power was kind of interesting to me at the time. But I got pigeonholed, so I worked for Atomic Energy Canada. I think that was actually my second job, because I think the first job I had to get, I ended up working at my mom's company, the company my mom worked for, which was a vaccine company.
Okay.
So I ended up just doing like web development type work. It was just like some kind of technical work that I could do. But all these jobs were the office environment was always like pretty stale. It was always like, that's another thing that's changed so much in the last few years, right? But like I was still part of that generation. By doing these co-op jobs, I was in these stale work environments. So it was like Office Space, the movie. Like that movie Office Space spoke to me.
Yeah.
When I was, I don't remember when it came out, but I remember feeling exactly like the main character. I forget his name in that, but where he's like cutting, like filleting a fish in his cubicle. Like, and he eventually becomes a construction worker. So I think, if you were wondering what happened to me, it's basically you just have to watch that movie, Office.
That's your life.
That's all it takes. So the office environments were just horrible. I remember not having enough work. They legitimately were not giving me much work to do. And the work would be something that I would finish really quick, and then I would have nothing else to do. I remember one of my later co-op terms, so probably when I was 21 or so, like third, fourth year university, I went to a company called Nuclear Safety Solutions, which is like a consulting company that works for Atomic Energy Canada and then works for all the other reactors in the country. So I think mostly in Ontario, actually, sorry. But so that was actually downtown Toronto. So I think I was living with my parents again at the time, and commuting downtown every day. And, some of that was an interesting work experience. I actually ended up getting an award for the best work report for that term.
Okay.
But I didn't feel like I was working that hard. I didn't, like, to me, I don't think it was just me. I think the work was, even compared to what we were doing in school, some of the work we were doing in school was really difficult. Like, even though I did well, I wouldn't say it was easy stuff. I would have to work really hard. I would have to study really hard. But then we would go to some of these jobs, and the type of work you were doing was always very different. Even at Nuclear Safety Solutions, I was inputting data into a computer program, and the computer program would do the rest. And it was basically just checking some, I think it was like stress values and piping systems. Not to get into too much detail, but it was like I would literally just put some numbers of some drawings into some computer program, and I would be like, "This is it. This is all you want me to do?" Like, we learned all this crazy stuff in school. You don't want me to do any of that?
I think,
and they'd be like,
I think that's a challenge. I feel like, so it sounds like the experience has really had an effect on sort of your outlook maybe of engineering. But like, I also think that I remember my first internship into government, and I kind of wondered, people were great. It was a great team to work for.
Did you think the same thing?
Yeah, and I was like, oh, I don't know if my skills are fully being utilized, and I feel like I could get the work done fairly simple, and I didn't always, it wasn't an issue with my team or my boss or anything like that, but it just wasn't the work. Like the planning wasn't done properly. Like, and I think that's an issue sometimes that happens with recruitment, is like, oh, we'll just get this young person in as a body, but I don't know if people really think about the experience that they should be giving to this young person, what kind of impact that has on their outlook of the field and all that sort of thing. Like, I don't think there's that kind of thought. I think people just think, oh, there's some cheap labor here. We'll just get somebody to do this shitty task and
no, exactly.
So, yeah.
No, and that's exactly, like, in hindsight, I go back and I go, okay, the jobs would have been interesting eventually, right? Excuse me. The jobs would have been interesting eventually, but I was young, right? Like, I had jobs in the, like, between being 18 and 22, 23. And like, it would have been better if maybe, the first job was like that, the second job was like that. But by the time I did, like, my fifth co-op term, or sixth co-op term, I think there were 6 of them. By the time I did my last one, it would have been good if I actually felt, oh, now I'm actually doing something.
Yeah. If there was some sort of progression, I guess, in what those rules look like. Yeah.
I actually worked in Fort McMurray as well. That was one of my terms.
Yeah, I remember that.
And to be honest, I think, as ironic as it is, because I did not like what was going on. I didn't know anything about what Fort McMurray was. This was 2004 when I worked in Fort McMurray. So
you didn't know about the oil sands really that much?
I didn't know. I don't know. Like, I don't think anyone in Ontario was thinking about the oil sands in 2004. I didn't hear about it. I just saw this job opportunity. Move to Alberta for 4 months and, like, go to northern Alberta and work in a mine. And I thought, well, that'll be a cool experience. It's different, at least. That's something totally different from what I'm doing here, right? And so when I went out there, I mean, it's interesting, like, Fort McMurray actually was probably my best co-op term because at least I got exposed to the hands-on side of things. And in a funny way, maybe part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now is because I went there. But if I hadn't, so I worked in the mine there.
Was it like a surface mine, or was it like I must have been?
It's a surface mine, so it's a strip mine. Yeah. That's how the oil sands works there. I guess it was working there mainly. There's other
in
types
situ now, right? So yeah,
that's right. So they were just starting to try to do the in situ stuff. Okay. But it was still strip mining for the most part. That's where I was located. At Syncrude.
Oh, I've been to those mines. They're massive.
Have you been to them? Yeah, they're insane. Yeah. They're crazy. Yeah. So this was 2004. I think it was like, business was booming there, and they were starting to ramp up a lot of projects. So, but I got actually positioned in the actual mine. So I was like on the edge of the strip mine. So it was like I was in a building that was basically right next to just piles of dirt. And like a lot of my peers that went to Fort McMurray didn't even get that close to that side of it, right? As engineers. Yeah. So I was in an office that had, I think, 3 engineers and like 20 tradespeople. Okay. So, and we worked with the tradespeople very closely. And that's actually one thing that I would say, despite it being one of the work that was going on there was some of the worst for the environment that I've ever been a part of. It was the best work environment I ever worked in. And that was and they even made fun of me for being this like kid from Toronto and even like being ridiculed the most out of any job that I've ever gone to. I still enjoyed it the most. And so because it was a small ratio of engineers to a big ratio of tradespeople, they were responsible for non-destructive testing of a lot of the steel that was cladding parts in the mine. Okay. So like there would be like a hopper that collects sand. And on the hopper, there would be these steel plates. And so the people I worked with it's non-destructive like maintenance team. So they would go around and actually just measure the thickness of the steel plates, because as the sand came into these hoppers, it would wear them down to almost nothing, right? And this oil sand is very abrasive, so it's like it's so hard on all the equipment that's there, everything that's going on there gets like worn down. Things just don't last, right? So it was an interesting, from that perspective, to see, okay, so I remember I had one coworker, and I still remember to this day, just like he would, so I had some work that I was supposed to be doing as an engineer. Yeah. So my boss would give me the same boring tasks that I was doing back in Toronto, that I didn't want to do. And then this guy, Chris, I think was his name, he would come into my office and say, bro, he was like the engineers were the quiet guys, and the tradespeople were like the loud, in your face, extroverted people. Yeah. Right. So this guy would like, throw open the door and be like, Brian, what are you doing right now? Let's go. And it was fun. Yeah. Like that's a lot
of those guys are also from Newfoundland too, right? Like they all come from they're hilarious. So
they were funny. There was always telling jokes, and it was just like, I think part of me remembered, oh, this is what living is like. Okay. Like I'm at work and I actually don't hate it. Yeah. I don't hate it because I was getting to see things. I was actually involved in things. Like, and I think it was just that simple hands-on element. And this brings me back to what, like, I think as I'm talking, I realize I could talk to you about this stuff for like 5 hours. Right. So I'm going to have to be careful not to talk too much. But if I'm passionate about like potentially later in my life changing anything about, leaving a legacy or something, on top of the artistic and creative work I feel like I'm doing now, it would be to try to help change engineering school. Because I think having that, and I think this is done in other countries, but having a system where you get to experience the hands-on side as well as the technical side is just huge. It's a game changer. So so I got to see welders there. I got to see, these non-destructive testing methods, and I got to drive a truck in the mine. I got to see what was going on.
The big ass trucks?
Not a big ass truck. No. What I mean is I drove a pickup truck to 2 different spots.
Okay.
But I got to actually be involved, I was given I can't imagine at some of these other jobs, like being given that much responsibility to say, you can go drive a truck to some, in dangerous dirt roads in this mine with no, it's a bit more dangerous than like what you're used to in a white collar job, right? I don't know, working at heights, like going up in a boom or something. And
I don't want to say that this is entirely, like, I don't want to generalize this, but I remember when I did move to Alberta, a senior leader in government had told me, he said, because he'd worked in Ontario, different parts of the world, he's like, there is an attitude in Alberta about, like, if you got good ideas or you're willing to put yourself out there, like there's this acceptance of like innovation and risk, or just giving people like the extra opportunity and that sort of thing. Like I think there is that sort of I don't know how to describe it, but when you're talking about this, like getting these opportunities to try these different things, like that is something that I have experienced here in Alberta, even in the field that I'm in, right? So yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all sorts of, obviously in Canada we have like the West Coast versus East Coast thing. We have, Alberta versus Ontario. And of course none of the guys in that office or in that shop would let me hear the end of it being from Ontario. They would make inappropriate, certain comments about Ontario that I won't even get into because it's, that's not the focus of this. But there is that side of like, yeah, I think I'm definitely more politically center or left, and a lot of the guys are quite right wing where I was working there. Yeah. So, there's some differences there, but in terms of just getting exposed to that type of work, I think that had a huge impact on me. And so when I came back to Toronto, I was actually also the only guy that didn't go back to work there for years and years.
Okay.
So out of my peers, everyone that from Waterloo that went there, I think there were 6 or 7 guys I worked. We were in a student village, so that was also a nice part of it. I got to live next to some students, and
it's all dorms,
we had sort of our own. Well, it was actually townhouses.
Oh, okay.
They put us up in townhouses. Like, this is what I mean. It was just for a younger person, it was a good. That's the kind of experience I was expecting from co-op, right? Yeah. And here it is. I only got it from this one job where I didn't believe in the work that was going on, so I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to go back because I felt this is horrible. Like, just the scale of operations there, what was going on, it blew my mind in a way where I thought, okay, back in Ontario, we're, watching movies about, Al Gore talk about climate change, and everyone's thinking, I felt like people didn't even know how, even remotely, how bad it actually is out there. I felt like I wanted to show everyone the oil sands and see, oh, you think climate change is bad? Like, check this out. And then it started coming out anyway, and people started talking about what was going on there, I think a few years after I was there. So weren't there a few documentaries about what was going on?
There's been so many. I mean, I think James Cameron came out here with Leo DiCaprio, and they did a whole thing. And
so and again, maybe not to go too much into that right now, but in terms of how it affected me, the positive was still just I saw what engineering could be like, where you're actually involved in both sides, which is very important. And if you can be that, like, you're supposed to be the guy that translates the technical information to the tradespeople in a way that's meaningful, and not to ridicule them, not to feel better than them because you've done more schooling than them in a certain way. I think that's another thing that I've really come to appreciate about trades is, there, the system has declared a hierarchy where tradespeople are lower than academics for whatever reason, and the kinds of understanding, it's definitely a different way that the brain works. Yeah. I feel like academic takes a certain way of thinking. Trades work can be fairly monotonous and just
systematic,
systematic and simpler in that way. But depending on what you're doing, and especially from the perspective of engineering, trades and engineering shouldn't be thought of as a different thing, because
that makes sense.
The experience that comes from doing things, it's like, I don't know, you can't learn from just books. That's the bottom line. Yeah. This is just like, it's not a difficult concept what I'm talking about, but for whatever reason it just doesn't get implemented. Except for, I've heard, I think certain Scandinavian countries are doing that more. I think maybe in Germany even they do it more, from what I've heard. Maybe in most of Europe they might be doing it, but for whatever reason, North America, they don't do it. They don't do this nearly as much. So anyway, so I think when I came back, I sort of, combined with what I was talking about last time I talked to you, my mental health not being in the best state, and being surrounded by only men, just feeling like I couldn't feel like a normal young person, and I felt too isolated. I think that put me down a path where I was like, okay, I can't go back to a stale office anymore. And I tried. Yeah. So I went traveling for half a year. I tried to get work in Australia, actually. I tried to do a working holiday in Australia, but luckily I had enough money saved up from the co-op jobs that I didn't have to work there. I did sort of like a backpacking trip, and part of me was trying to take advantage of the working holiday visa. But another part of me, as soon as I got there and tried to get different jobs, I actually tried to get like bartending jobs. I tried to get like whatever I could. Yeah. But I was not a very good bartender, to say the least. Just not social enough, not extroverted enough. And so then I tried to get like some engineering jobs in Sydney. And I remember going to some interviews, but I was living at a hostels, for like $20 a night. Yeah. I didn't even have like a suit, I don't think, at the time. I think I borrowed some French guy's suit. I was like, hey man, I got an interview. You want to give me your suit? But like, I started getting back to normal mentally in Australia because I was backpacking, and I started meeting people. Honestly, I felt like I started connecting with foreigners way better than I connected with my peers in Canada. So for whatever reason, I think I felt like a lot of the Europeans I was meeting were more worldly. They were more interesting to me, not as judgmental, not as, I don't know how to say it, but
well, I feel like if you're meeting people at a hostel though, like they probably share a similar mentality.
Yeah, right? And it's not just that they're European, but just in general, I think having that, like more open-mindedness and just meeting people that were willing to sort of push themselves out of their comfort zone, and travel and meet new people all the time. I think that experience of meeting new people every day, got me back into a place where I felt alive. I've never felt so alive as when I went to Australia and stopped trying to get jobs and just traveled and just met people. And that was like the part of engineering I was missing, where just talking to people again. meeting, whatever, trying new things. I learned how to surf. I remember I was actually really good at it. Like I went to some surf camp and I was one of the best at the surf camp. And I was like, wow, like I thought of myself as this academic guy who wasn't that into, like, I was somewhat athletic, but I sort of rediscovered my love for some of these like outdoorsy sports. And I was like, why wasn't I doing this more? Like I used to ski too, and I was like, why wasn't I skiing more? Why wasn't I doing stuff in Canada that I could have done? So it was just like this reconnecting with like being a normal social young human. So and that changed everything. And when I got back, I actually tried to get jobs again here. I got a job at another nuclear place. It was, again, I didn't know what types of jobs to get. So I sort of gave it a shot. I got a job at this company called Babcock and Wilcox, which makes nuclear reactors as well. And then, the environment there, again, I felt like I went to the interview and I made it clear. I had come back all refreshed. I had a tan and I was all like, I was all motivated, confident. Yeah. I was super confident. I came back and I remember having an interview with an HR woman and I was just like shooting the shit with her. And it felt like a comfortable conversation. I was like, man, this is awesome. Yeah. She seems great. Yeah. This place seems great. Yeah. And when I actually, it was like having this normal person, like the HR woman was like the type of person I would have met traveling. I felt like she was a normal social person. And then, she introduced me to the engineers and it was back to where I was when I was in Waterloo.
Just dry as anything.
It's like, hi, Brian.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you know about science?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, no. Take me out of
like
here.
Sounds like a bad movie. Yeah.
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 So I lasted 4 months before I quit.
Yeah.
Then I struggled to find out what to do with myself for a while. I worked for my dad for like 4 months, essentially not doing that much. And then I kept trying to rationalize my way through career choices. Yeah. So the next thing I thought, oh, well, I wasn't getting enough creative work. So that was the problem. So what's creative but still somewhat related to engineering? So I found this program called clinical biomedical engineering, I guess.
Okay.
At U of T. It was a master's program. And it was billed as this program that was way more hands-on, that would allow you to actually, because you had these, I guess there was technically an internship, and there was still a thesis involved, but there was also, you got to see surgeries. So you actually got to go into a number of different surgeries and see what types of tools they needed in these different procedures, and it seemed hands-on,
which is what you're really looking for, right? So
yeah. And then the idea of like designing, I thought, okay, nuclear reactor work was like way too large scale. I felt like I was more of a cog in a wheel, because they're such huge, complicated projects that you only get to work on, like at the nuclear jobs, I would work on like a bolt. It would be like a manhole cover bolt. I remember. I think this is one of the things I did at Babcock and Wilcox. Yeah. It's like, because they made essentially pressure vessels. Right. They make boilers. Even as a welder now that I'm a really good welder now, I would have been fascinated with Babcock and Wilcox, the company I worked for, where they did these pressure vessels. I probably would have been way more fascinated now. Or even as a welding inspector or something, I could get all excited and nerdy and talk forever about like inspecting welds. Yeah. But back then I didn't know about welding, so I wasn't interested in it. but anyway, so I went into this biomedical. I applied for the program, got in because my grades were still good from before. And I remember coming back from this, the couple of years off and having traveled, I could already notice a huge difference between me and the other students in the class. I felt like I had a much more relaxed, like more worldly approach to everything, and
worldly.
I think I just having seen some of the world and been outside of this bubble of whatever the system was here.
Yeah.
I just felt like, I don't know if that sounded like arrogance.
No. I
worldly.
just
I think it was worldly just because I got to see, even to talk to other people from other countries, and every day meet someone different from a different part of the world.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
That just made me a more relaxed and open person, and just aware of, this is not the only way to do things. This is not the only place where this type of stuff is happening. And maybe it was also in the back of my head, I was thinking of all the other types of things one could do for a career.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be this dry all the time. It didn't have to be whatever it was. But I think I just came into the room, like feeling like more of a laid back surfer guy.
Yeah.
Whereas, everyone there was still, I don't know. I felt like,
but just in that grind,
right?
It's
it's sort of in the grind, but
Yeah.
I would also like think of it like, I was watching The Big Bang Theory last night. I didn't used to love that show, but like there's definitely certain elements of my personality. I can be that like intense nerd guy, but I felt like everyone in the program was still just that intense nerd person that couldn't get out of their shell as much.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so anyway, I remember starting to feel like, okay, these jobs are still not really for me. And I didn't like that intensity. I didn't like that one-sidedness to it, where it was just, you're just a brain. You're just the smart guy here. That's what you do. You're not here to be social. You're not here to be anything else. You're just a smart guy.
Yeah.
And I was getting sick of that again, and just going through that program. I think it felt dry, more dry than I expected. Seeing the surgeries were interesting for sure. I started working at Sunnybrook Hospital. I actually started working on MRI research.
Okay.
But the environment there was incredibly intense, and I just felt like it was missing this. It still didn't feel like where I wanted to be for whatever reason. So, I guess that, which brings me to, again, I know I'm talking a lot here. I don't know how are we for time here?
No, we're okay,
right?
I do want to. It sounds like we're getting to we're
getting to the meat of it here,
to Motobrix and route engineering. Yeah. So
when I worked at Sunnybrook Hospital, that's actually really where things started to change. Where I started to realize, okay, I actually started riding motorcycles. I guess I started riding motorcycles when I came back from my trip to Australia.
Did you ride there?
I rode very a very small amount there.
Okay.
Because I think there was like a tour in Northern Australia where you got to ride a little scooter in the shape of a chopper.
Okay.
And it was automatic, so it wasn't manual like most bikes are. But it was, you got to it was a tour of the countryside, and you would get to see kangaroo in the wild. So this guy would just it was called Scooteroo, I think. Okay. He would take us on these little mini choppers, and we just ride through the countryside and spot kangaroos, and it was amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so I think they went 80 kilometers an hour max.
Yeah.
But I remember, we didn't have any protective gear on or anything like that. I think we maybe had a helmet.
Yeah.
But I remember like going 80 kilometers an hour on this tiny little chopper scooter thing and being like, wow, this is
freedom. This is freedom.
for me.
Yeah.
This is freedom.
Yeah.
Like spotting kangaroos. This is amazing. So I came back, took the motorcycle course right away. Started working my way up into bigger and bigger bikes, and by the time I was working at Sunnybrook Hospital, so I was in this what I would define the opposite of riding motorcycles, which is like this intense math and science work at a hospital. And then after work, I would ride my motorcycle, and I felt like the me that I was experiencing when I was in Australia. That was like the freedom Brian, and then there's like engineering Brian.
Engineering Brian, yeah.
Yeah, and there was just this like huge difference between who I wanted to be. And I remember it was like I was still a nerd. Like I was very much, and I am very much a nerdy guy. But I think, you could even see it more back then. I remember looking at pictures of myself, and I like, I looked like everyone else. I looked like a nerdy engineering student. But I started to imagine what I wanted to be. Yeah. And I think I had a vision for who I wanted to become. And that's really what started to change things. And when I thought of who I wanted to become, I basically, like, if I look at myself now, I think I've actually achieved that, which is interesting. But I started to notice people were working on motorcycles and creating custom bikes that weren't the normal of what we were used to seeing in the 2000s. So I don't know if you remember much, because I don't know if you were into... I don't think you're into motorcycles.
No, I don't know anything really, but...
Yeah, so... back in the 2000s, I don't know if you remember, like, Jesse James, there was Orange County Choppers.
I used to watch OCC.
There were these shows,
time.
right? Yeah, Orange County Choppers. So you remember that show? Yeah. That was the thing back then, right? That was the custom bike thing.
Yes.
I didn't even think... I watched the show too, but I didn't think much about it because I didn't even ride motorcycles yet. But once I started riding... I sort of remembered, I started looking at some of those episodes of like Orange County Choppers and some of that stuff. And I remember, sort of scoffing at it, like thinking, man, those bikes were so flashy. Yeah. Those were in bad taste, in my opinion, at the time. Because it's all about like bling, rather than actual artistic, to me anyway. This is, it's somewhat insulting to people that like that kind of style, but I don't like it. I don't think it's nice at all. I think it's flashy and stupid. Can I acknowledge the work that goes into some of those bikes, especially now after I've done some of the work myself? Absolutely. I think it takes an amazing skill to do what they were doing.
Right.
But
just not the design.
The design and the look of it, not my thing. But anyway, what I started to see, I think in the 2010s, like maybe it might have been like around 2010, I started noticing there were these people turning vintage bikes from the 70s, like vintage Hondas, mainly, into what they were calling cafe racers, which cafe racer is like, I think it was in the UK in like post-war time. They would turn these Triumphs into like race bikes, but people would modify it themselves. So they would put like I think they would modify, like the handlebars would be lower. They would make it more like a racing bike than it was out of the factory. So there was a whole culture that came out of that, and I guess I was never aware of this, but in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. People started focusing, instead of on the flashy chopper thing, some of these builder people started focusing again more on these cafe racer inspired bikes. And once I started seeing them, I didn't even realize what I didn't know where this was coming from. I didn't realize the history of it or anything like that. But I saw these bikes, and a lot of people have gone through the same process as me. And when they've seen these bikes, they went crazy over them, right? Like nothing that was being produced out of the factories, like Kawasaki, Suzuki, whatever, Triumph. Actually, Triumph was one of the companies that started producing one of these factory styled, like vintagey cafe racery bikes.
Yeah.
So once I started seeing this, I sort of got interested in seeing if I could modify my bikes. And that's really where the idea sort of popped into my head, because some of this was very grassroots. It was just guys in their garage doing what seemed like minimal modification work. But I sort of went down this rabbit hole and just, I think there was a show on TV called Cafe Racer TV.
Okay.
And it wasn't like mainstream. It wasn't quite the same as like OCC was back then, but it was sort of, if you were interested in it, it was coming out, I think, some of these like men's magazines, like, you know, some of these like magazines that showcase watches and things.
Yeah.
I think there's a website called Uncrate.
Okay.
And they would showcase like fancy cars, luxury items. So totally, I'm not a materialistic guy, but like I started coming across these cool bikes in these sort of materialistic magazines and things like that. Yeah. And I actually read a book by this guy, Matthew Crawford. It's called Shop Class as Soulcraft.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of this book.
No.
It was a bestseller for a while. And the book is it's written by a philosopher. I think he's a professor in philosophy. But he's also a motorcycle mechanic. And so he wrote this book about how the value of working with your hands. Basically what I've talked about with my experiences in the oil sands. So he talked about it, and he talked about it from a very academic, from a very philosophical perspective, sort of like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, that book as well. But this was more of I guess that book's more fiction. This is a nonfiction. This is just a discussion about working with your hands, and specifically he was a motorcycle mechanic, so he talked a lot about working on vintage motorcycles and the skill that's involved, the thought process that goes into it, and how it's actually, and the art that goes into. I think he talks a lot about plumbing and electrical work, because he was like an electrician for a while as well. So anyway, the book's a really interesting read. I think more people need to start talking about this sort of like the value of hands-on work. But I basically dove in head first and started learning how to work on my bike. I think I had a super sport bike at the time. I sold that one because I thought, okay, I'll get something that's a little bit more, something that I could actually start to learn and work on, something that I'm not afraid to cut into.
I think I remember seeing that sport bike for the first time. Like, I think the last time I saw you would have been on there, and I just remember being so surprised that, man, this guy's riding that.
That I had. It was a green one. It was a Kawasaki ZX6R, which is a really fast Kawasaki bike. Like, green is their color. It's super flashy.
Well, keep in mind, here's the contrast I have, right? Because the last time I saw you drive something would have been your mom's station wagon. And here I see you driving this Kawasaki super speed bike. I'm like, what the fuck happened?
So, yeah. And I mean, I got into cars too in university. I had a Honda Prelude.
Oh yeah, the Prelude. Yeah. So yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
I think you did see that one.
Yeah.
So I was getting into faster, cool cars and things like that. But when I sold the Kawasaki, I got the Suzuki SV650, which is not a vintage bike that's being used to turn into cafe racers by most people. But I had seen some other guy on a forum in Toronto actually modify it to look like more of what they call a naked bike, which is just a motorcycle that's been stripped of basically all its. It's sort of been made to look like a Ducati Monster, which is Ducati. Ducati sort of started that. I think they're the ones that really made the naked bike what it is.
Okay.
So
like what is that? What is tell me more about naked, like a naked bike. Like what is that?
So a naked bike, they also call it a street fighter sometimes. Okay. It's a style of bike that you take a sport bike and you strip all the plastic off of it. Oh. So you take usually they have fairings, which are the plastic covering in the front. So they'll take the fairings off. Sometimes they'll modify the plastic in the rear as well. And it just becomes literally a frame with two wheels, and there's no wind protection. There's nothing there. There's just a headlight attached to the front forks. So that's the naked style. I think that was being sold more in Europe. More of the European bikes were naked bikes, but it never really took off as much in the early 2000s in North America. Like North America was always either you ride a fully faired plastic sport bike, or you ride a Harley Davidson. That was the thing, right? So at the time that was another part of it. It was this genre outside of the norm. It was not a super sport Kawasaki, and it was not a Harley Davidson cruiser. So not as many people were as into those bikes at the time. I started noticing people doing this type of work, and I started working out of my parents' garage, and I set a pretty ambitious goal, to turn that SV650 into a naked bike. And the first set of modifications I did were pretty basic, but I was so bad at wrenching or working on motorcycles at the time. I was really bad at working on cars. I was just horrible. I didn't know how to use tools. I didn't know. You have to get to a point where you feel things. So you have to know how tight, even something as simple as how tight to tighten a bolt. There are specs on that. You can use torque specs,
torque wrenches and stuff.
But most mechanics, you don't use a torque wrench for every single bolt you work with. And I didn't even have a good feel for that. I remember over tightening things, stripping things, breaking bolts, just getting it, just all the learning curve started at zero, right? Basically.
Yeah.
But I got it to a point where I still had the vision, and I still was determined to do this. And I thought it was a good application of my engineering background. So I went through it. By the time that first winter, I think it was a winter project, I'd done very minimal stuff. So I'd put handlebars on. I had changed the wiring in the front. I had done a lot of electrical work actually to shorten the wiring harness and redo it. I changed some of the electrical work. I think I put a different headlight on. But compared to where I am now, it was very minor modifications. And I wanted to do a bit of metal work, but I was just starting to get into that. So I think around the same time I took a welding course at George Brown. And I actually found I had a knack for welding. That sort of started to translate to the motorcycle stuff. I worked at a machine shop at Sunnybrook Hospital. So I started to learn a little bit of machining. Again, very beginner to machining. But I started to just dip my toe into these different areas that I had access to at Waterloo. There was a machine shop at Waterloo, but I didn't know. I didn't feel like I had the time.
So focus on the school, right? So
yeah, and I think we all were unless you already had worked in a machine shop and you had it, or you wanted to modify your motorcycle. In hindsight, the best time to start modifying a motorcycle would have been when I was at Waterloo in engineering, because I would have had access to the machine shop there. There probably was welding equipment there. I just didn't even know about it. But I could have gone heavy. If that's what I mean, if the program was a hands-on program, I would have been all in on these. Like I would have been building everything when I was 20, but it wasn't. So anyway, I went into all this. A year goes by. I start to get more ambitious with what I'm doing. And then I went to work for a mechanic, actually. I went to work with an auto mechanic. That sort of fell through. And yeah, that fell through because he didn't have a lot of patience for where I was.
Right.
I wasn't that skilled.
Phase. Right.
I was at the learning phase. I think he thought he had an impression from talking to me that I'd be much more skilled, and I wasn't. So when I showed up, and I think he quickly got frustrated with me, understandably, and so that didn't work out. But I kept at it. I kept at it on my own, and then I eventually got to the point where I had some money saved up, and instead of stressing about making sure that I guess I made a conscious decision at that point. I said, I'm gonna put all my efforts into. I didn't like what I was doing at Sunnybrook Hospital. I was still a researcher doing MRI research there. I didn't like where that was going. I actually applied to go to med school at one point. This is like, there's a whole bunch of years there. This is in the early 2010s.
Yeah.
Where basically, I think by 2013, I think I was working on the motorcycles more. And things just, I still wasn't happy with where things were going. But I was so excited to dive more and more and more and more into learning how to weld, learning how to create things to build a custom motorcycle. And I think as I started seeing that community and these builders in the States and in Europe as well, I had a clear vision for what I wanted to learn how to do. So there were these bikes that were coming out that were, involved a certain level of fabrication skill. So it was clear to me I had something in front of me, like a goal, right?
Yeah.
To say, okay, I want to build the same things that these guys are building. So I had a list of things I had to get good at, and the main one was welding, but also metalworking in general, which isn't just welding, like knowing how to use a grinder, knowing how to machine things, knowing how to cut things. And even measuring and lining everything up in a certain way was like a huge part of what I had to learn.
Yeah.
So I think I had this clear goal. I had some money, and I basically said to myself, okay, I'm going to try to live frugally, but I'm going to give this a shot. And I really just jumped off the deep end and went all in on learning how to do everything. And I basically didn't make much money at all for a few years there. But
just relying more on your savings for that time then.
Yeah, and that's like, I was very lucky. I had come into some money just sort of through, some inheritance basically. So, but where in hindsight it might have been good to put that towards a house or something like that. But instead, I basically funded my own education and went through like five painstaking years of like failure after failure trying to build this into something. And I think you don't realize it when you're doing it, but every little trial and error thing that might take you, a lot longer than it would take someone who learned when they were younger, who apprenticed with someone else, right? It took me that much longer. It was that much harder to get. Like, I ended up having falling outs with people. Because I kept trying to work with people. Like, that mechanic sort of, kicked me out. Then I tried to work with some peers, like people my own age, at my own, that weren't also professionals in the field. So I worked with a couple guys. We got this garage on Dufferin, and we sort of, that had a falling out as well, because I felt like I was the only guy that was going there that was 100% committed to trying to learn this stuff. But I was also probably difficult to work with. You know, in hindsight, I can see that. But it, you know, it's just, I went through a struggle of trying to really, like, being so focused on wanting to learn this stuff, but not having anyone that could really help me get there. I didn't feel like I wasn't skilled enough to apprentice with anyone. I didn't want to go back to school for that. I had done the George Brown courses in welding, but I felt like I had done as much as I could do in the school there. I had to get real experience. But rather than work in a rough welding shop, which I didn't feel like was the best fit for me, I decided to go this route where I just learned myself, and that was just sort of the road I had to take, I guess, given what was available to me.
So when does the current company you have, Motobrix, when does that get created?
So Motobrix, I think I actually created it pretty early on after, I think when I started working out of that small garage with, like, it ended up being 3 other guys. I started to work on this idea of Motobrix, and it was, I was modifying my first vintage bike. I actually started a blog first where I was talking about, like, transitioning careers, because it was relevant to me at the time that I was a highly academic person trying to do trades work.
Yeah.
And I wrote a blog about that. Didn't really go anywhere like most blogs do. But it got me sort of trying to showcase what I was doing, and it got me not afraid to be honest about what I was going through, like all the struggles of what I was doing, right? And so I think I created Motobrix at that time, even as I was making my first vintage bike. And the first bike came out of that shop, and I mean, it wasn't anything that special, but I think I at that point already was starting to show myself as a member of the motorcycle builder community, which was pretty small. There weren't that many people actually building anything here.
Yeah.
And a lot of people wanted to, and especially in the mid 2010s, like, I don't think it was still in its infancy, and I was one of the few people actually going all in on it. Because most people wouldn't quit their day job and
take that risk, right? Yeah.
And it's one of those things that if you're, you know, it's actually difficult to have all the right combination of skills to be able to do that work yourself. Most people aren't a good welder, a good metal worker, a good electrician, a good mechanic, and also good at marketing and good at, like, there's like, most people aren't good at, I'm not good at marketing. So, but it required, like, becoming known for someone that builds bikes. I didn't even know where this was going to go.
Yeah.
And I guess I just trusted that it would go somewhere. But I think it was at that time, after I built the first bike, again, it wasn't incredibly impressive, but I started to get a little bit of people noticing, oh, this guy's doing metal work on motorcycles. And I started to get people actually asking me to do modifications. But then the more interesting thing too was I started to get people asking me to do furniture. And that's
interesting.
Well, because I had a friend, and again, this is like, there's all these sides to this story, but I had a friend who was an industrial designer who designed furniture. And he actually asked me originally, when I first started getting into this, he asked me to, or we were just talking, and I ended up helping him do some metal work for he started a small furniture company, which he started it, he closed it down pretty quick because he decided that for him entrepreneurship wasn't for him, so he went and worked for another company. But he's the one that got me into like building furniture, doing metalwork for architectural stuff. And I kind of liked it, I guess, because I liked welding. So it sort of happened in tandem, right? Like as I was trying to build motorcycles more, I kept wanting to learn new ways of doing things in metalwork. Yeah. And then that ended up helping my furniture work as well, to the point where I started getting noticed for having good metalwork. And that happened sort of organically, where I remember being asked by the landlord of that garage to start making stuff for his house. Like he was just like, he came by the garage one day. He's like, "What are you doing?" And then he's like, "Do you think you could do that for me?"
That's so interesting how that sort of opportunity just arrives, right? Like,
yeah. And like, I seem to distinctly remember, it's hard to redefine the image of yourself. Like one key thing is my self-identity was tied to being the smart guy, right? The academic math guy, math and science. And for years it had been that my identity was tied to being that person, that all of a sudden I was forcing myself to be a completely different identity in a sense, right? Because what I realized is people's views of you, especially in first impressions, are pretty simple, right? Like people don't go, "Oh wow, he's a guy who's welding who's also really good at math and is capable of designing all sorts of interesting engineering things." Instead, they just go, "Oh, that guy's welding. That guy's making something with his hands, right? Yeah. That must be his identity. That's who he is." And I think because I had quit my job and I was focused 100% on that, it's sort of like, I remember having a bit of an identity crisis at that point, where I was trying to build all these bikes and I was getting recognition for all sorts of new things to me, like being somewhat artistic. I was getting recognition for. I was getting recognition for welding really well. I was getting recognition for making these motorcycles. Like it was starting to come out that I had an attention to detail that no one else had. That I was creating bikes in a way, and even to this day, I haven't done anything revolutionary in the custom bike world, like compared to some of the stuff that's out there. I've had bikes published in online magazines that are the top in the world, but I still consider what I'm doing, it's not nearly at the level of some of the top guys, but the goal is still to get there. But I guess my identity was becoming more and more like, on the inside I felt like I'm nowhere near like what some of these other bike builders are at. But on the outside, people were going, "You're a bike builder, and I'm going to give you work, and I want to see what you can do." And it just sort of took off from there. And over the last few years from there, it changed until eventually I am where I am today, which is I eventually got a shop to do metalwork. And
So maybe just to wrap this up before we get into the final two questions, how does it work in terms of if somebody wants a custom bike? Like, do they can you build something from scratch, or is it only just like what's the process look like, I guess?
Usually what I do is I'm modifying bikes, right? So I'm generally not building things completely from scratch.
Okay.
And that's one of the goals, is to eventually build everything from scratch except for the engine. But for now, I'm still, for the most part, I'll take a frame. So it'll be usually it's a 70s bike of some kind. That's been the trend. Most people are into that. Could be a newer bike as well. But I'll take a 70s bike, like a Honda, or these days I'm doing a lot of BMWs from that era. And I'll take the whole bike, I strip it down, and I generally will cut the back half of the frame completely off, make a new one from scratch out of tubing, weld that on, create my own seat from scratch with a seat pan, foam. I shape the foam myself. Then I get it upholstered. I have people to do certain types. I don't do my own upholstery, so I have someone who does that. And then I do all the other modifications. So I'll add tabs, cut off tabs where I don't want them to be. I'll add tabs where I want to, add like foot pegs. I might have different types of foot pegs. Might have different components that attach to the engine, whatever it is. And then sometimes I'll modify the wheels too. So put a completely different type of wheel, re-spoke it, stuff like that. And at the end, sometimes you're putting modern components. So the suspension could be completely different. The suspension mounts can be completely from scratch. And at the end of it, I'm also trying to get into sheet metal more. So eventually I'd like to be able to make my own gas tank. I've started to get into making some bodywork out of sheet metal, so aluminum or steel. Yeah. And then from there, that's generally, I think the style and what I've ended up gravitating towards is it's like a modern vintage style. So it might have an LED headlight on it. It might have sort of modern components. Usually the electrical system has been totally redone. So sometimes you can take a key fob and just tap it. There's a company that makes a reader so that you can just tap a key fob to start your bike. So it's sort of these like modern touches to things. Yeah. And the idea is to make sort of a sleek design that's like, I think an industrial designer would be proud of, not just something flashy, not just something, with, I think that OCC style was more like, let's see how many things we can cram onto this.
But it's all for TV too, right? So,
yeah. Whereas the idea with a lot of what's going on these days with a lot of builders and with what I like to do is making things look as sleek as possible and minimal. It's all about minimal. So it's about removing as many things as possible and hiding all the things that are necessary.
Yeah. Do you think you'll work with electric engines at some point, or electric motors, I should say?
Yeah, definitely. So that's also something that's becoming more popular slowly. Some of the companies are starting to build electric motorcycles, and there's definitely some characteristics of the electric motors that are even more insane in terms of power. I think some of those motors are incredibly powerful. So, I'm not tied to. I have no.
Not tied to the gas engine or anything like that.
I'm not one of these purists that's like, it's got to be gas engine or nothing. Yeah. I just happen to work on mostly gas engines because it's what's out there. And I mean, I like the sound of them. There's that whole thing. But
do you get any requests for anyone who's? I know you're not necessarily you're going to start to get into the engine side of things, but do you get any requests for anyone who's like, hey, I'd love to retrofit my bike for it to be essentially be an e-motorcycle?
Yeah, I haven't gotten that yet, but I think it's coming. I think for sure.
Because that's coming for cars. Like there's a couple of places in Alberta where they'll retrofit cars. So I imagine that's going to come for motorcycles too.
Oh, 100%. I think it's already slowing. It's like it's bubbling up out of the surface. Yeah, like it's starting to show up. I think people are starting to. I know I've seen some. I've been to some of these bike shows. One of them in Texas actually. And I seem to remember when I was there in 2019. It's called the Hand Built Show, and there were a couple of electric bike retrofits. There was one actually same kind of BMW that I end up working on a lot. There was one that some guy had put a electric motor in a vintage BMW. Yeah, so it was kind of cool.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Should we move to our final two questions here?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So first question is, I gave you time on this one now.
Yeah.
First question is, dead or alive, who are 5 people you'd want to have supper with?
Yes. So I've thought about this a lot. I've come up with probably 10 or 20 different names.
Just 5.
But I will try to focus in on just 5. Yeah. I think one is the obvious one that like I would imagine a lot of people would say, and that's Einstein.
I've heard that.
Yeah. So definitely him. Do you want an explanation, or do you want to
You
just?
can if you want. Yeah, it's your
Well, I
list,
don't
man.
think Einstein needs an explanation.
Yeah.
So interesting enough, I was trying to relate some of these answers to, you know, I guess what I'm interested in and some of the things. But it's funny because some of the people that I could mention are people that I could actually they're actually it's realistic that I might meet some of these people, I guess.
Which
It's
is
realistic
super
that I
cool.
might
Yeah.
talk to some of these people. But
Yeah.
I guess the second guy I would say is that author Matthew Crawford, who wrote the book Shop Class is Soulcraft. And I just think he that book kind of changed my life. So that for me,
that was the one that you said
he'd be an
about working
interesting
with
person
hands.
to talk to. Yeah. He was the guy that wrote the book about that. So that would be a second one. I think a third one would be Elon Musk. Again, I don't love everything about Elon Musk. I think he's obviously a character, but I would be interested in just just talking to him because he's all the work he's done.
Absolutely.
So that's the third. Another one that actually came to mind, and this is an interesting one for me. I think most people wouldn't expect me to say this, but I actually would say Warren Buffett.
Okay.
And I've actually gotten more interested in the stock market and investing in the last few years. So this seems totally off topic for me, but I'm trying to use investing as a way to facilitate my career actually. So I've gotten way more interested in finance in general and investing, and so he's one of the top guys in that.
Yeah.
So
Elon Musk and Warren Buffett, I don't think get along with each other, so that's an interesting dinner table you got already.
Is the idea that they'll all be at the same?
No. Yeah, actually, you could have individual ones, but I'm just saying if you had those at the same table, I'm just saying Elon Musk and Buffett apparently don't like each other. So.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, and the fifth would be probably Barack Obama. I just think he's just an amazing person. Yeah. All around amazing person. So definitely would like to talk to him.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me on that one. He's on my 5 for sure. So very, very cool 5. So you think you'd have them individually or together?
I think it would be a weird dinner table. I think that would be a very weird.
So
well, actually, like Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, and Obama would realistically could be at the same table.
Yeah, for sure.
They probably have been. Other than that, Matthew Crawford is a lot smaller scale than these other guys.
I think you could have them all together. I think it'd be a good conversation.
Yeah, but he could be there. I don't think that would be a problem.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, last question. Besides the circle of life, what do you know for sure?
Yeah, this was the one that apparently you asked me, and I probably zoned out at some point and somehow did not remember that you'd asked me this question. Besides the circle of life, what do I know for sure? Okay, so this is a weird answer, but it's just one thing that came to my mind on the spot because I didn't really think about this much until now. But I feel like I know for sure that the climate change is a huge problem on Earth. That's one of the things I feel like I know for sure.
Yeah.
And that's been on everyone's mind, I guess, a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's we had somebody we talked to this person from RBC and talked about climate change, and he was just feeling very optimistic that human ingenuity would be able to solve this thing, and he felt like that was something for sure. So, I mean, that's an absolute truth, and it's still interesting that people still discuss how talk about the science and all that kind of stuff. Although we were talking about offline, which you're like, oh, what's your views on this? So I was like, no, I'm good with this. And you're like, yeah, because one time you told me about this documentary you saw, and maybe just for the listeners, really quick,
this is interesting.
Yeah, back in undergrad, I had seen this documentary. It was talking about the great climate change hoax, or the great global warming hoax, right? And I think I had just seen Inconvenient Truth, and I was like, oh yeah, this is amazing to know. And then I seen this thing, and I was like, oh,
it
man.
sort of
like
went against everything that 100%. You had just learned.
Yeah. And it was just because it talked about the sun's influence on global warming and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh man, people are being duped. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. This is like the biggest lie. And
you wouldn't have been the only person to think that at that time, especially.
No.
But I think you said that you mentioned something to me. You said, check this documentary out.
Oh, did I?
I think you did, and I got kind of upset. I think at the time, where I thought, how could Rupesh believe this? I was upset. I was just like, no. Anyway, but like, I think it's fair, and like, and there, you know what? There was a part of me that was like, it tapped into maybe a hope for me. It's like, no one wants to believe that climate change is real. It would be way better if it wasn't. So I think it tapped into a small bit of hope for me. But I think I was fairly confident at that time, even, that we were in trouble. So, but I mean, so much has happened since then as well. Because that would have been what, 2006, 7?
Early mid 2000s, something like that. Yeah. But so much has come out.
I guess like climate change is a big part of what is that a big part of your work as well?
Not my direct work, but I mean, I have worked on climate policy in the past, and sustainability is something that I'm personally focused on and professionally want to get back into at some point. And so, yeah, it's don't need to convince me any further. And then even on the podcast too, just having people talk about, we have people talk about regenerative agriculture and the benefits of that on climate, and even just from like climate markets and lots of different things. So it's definitely important. So Brian, man, I enjoyed hearing your full story, man. I feel like I went all into it,
so
it's good. It's I think there are a lot of people who feel, as we started this conversation off, like that they need to have this sort of defined path, and hopefully if people hear this and maybe they're struggling with the same kind of dilemma, even if it's at the age that we're at, right, approaching 40 almost, right?
It doesn't really
it's
matter.
It's okay. It doesn't matter. You're right. And I think what it was so impressive is just that this tinkering kind of mindset that you've had, and this desire to have this kind of creative workspace is, I think more and more people want that, right? People don't want to be bound down to things, and even if they're in a routine job, like creativity is something that everybody wants. They want some sort of ownership, and also just like that other piece of like you wanting that social connection with people, right? Like you just didn't want that sort of dry work environment. I think there are a lot of people who want that too, and are probably struggling in this kind of post-COVID work environment, right? Where they're working hybrid or not being able to see their colleagues. I feel like people are wanting that more and more. I don't know, or maybe it's also pushing people to just become completely antisocial, which would be really sad. But,
no, I don't think it's going in that direction. I think people have always wanted to be. You need that connection. You need to be working with people. I think that's a huge part. Nothing happens alone. That's something that I've tried to work on as well, is just remembering that nothing happens alone. As much as I have a tendency to do too much or try to do too much on my own.
Yeah.
But being social and dealing with people it's I think, you know, it makes everyone's lives better.
Yeah.
And one last thing, I think I've noticed that my story has sort of inspired a lot of people already. And I've seen people themselves change careers. I've actually witnessed people who I actually worked on a motorcycle for someone. He was already doing some of the work himself, but he went on to, he's actually got his own shop now.
Wow.
And I remember at some point, I had talked to him and I had sort of encouraged him. I said, you know, he's like, I don't know if I should do this. He was a younger guy and he was thinking of going into like, I think water services at the city of Vaughan or something like that. And I said, like, you know, don't feel like obligated to do that. I think I noticed that I was an inspiration to him, like that me doing what I was doing gave him the confidence to go and do it himself. And that hasn't been the first. Like I've unknowingly become a bit of a leader. You know, like I don't think of myself as a leader, but just my determination to quit my job and focus 100% of my efforts on something that is outside my comfort zone at first and totally different is sort of like when I've talked to people, sometimes they're just like, holy crap, I would never think of doing that myself. And then years later I find out that they've done it too. So,
and there's nothing more rewarding and fulfilling than that, I think, right? I mean, like, you're obviously, there's the personal fulfillment of just how your own career and what you're doing and the success you're finding and all that's always fulfilling. But when you have that impression on somebody else, when you have no real control and you've shaped something like so positive, like that's huge. So
so
man, that's great.
I feel good about that.
Yeah. Brian, man, thanks for your time. Appreciate the conversation. We'll put all your stuff in the show notes and where people can reach you. And thanks so much for your time, and maybe we'll do this again some other time.
Yeah. I feel like there's tons of little talks I could have too, you know, at some point. So I know this was a long one, but
yeah. All right, Len.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian, again, and we'll talk later. Okay, bye. See you. Bye.